Every history class you ever took started the same way. First came farming, then came villages, then came religion, then came cities, then came writing, and somewhere around 5,000 years ago, civilization officially began. That was the story. Neat. Logical. Taught in every school in America. Then in 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt walked up a hill in southeastern Turkey, and within weeks, the entire timeline started to fall apart. What Schmidt found on that hill was not supposed to exist. Not at that age, not with that scale, not with that level of craftsmanship. It was a complex of massive stone pillars carved with extraordinary skill, arranged in deliberate circles, built by people who had no pottery, no metal tools, and no established cities. People living before fully developed agricultural societies had emerged. People who, according to every textbook written before 1994, were not yet capable of building anything like this. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, and it is one of the most important, most unsettling, and most under-discussed discoveries in the history of human civilization. If this is the kind of story that makes you question what you were taught, please subscribe to this channel right now and hit the bell. This is exactly what we do here. We find the places, the discoveries, and the events that change the story. Every subscriber makes it possible to keep going deeper. Now, let us get into it. The hill sits in southeastern Turkey, about 10 miles northeast of the ancient city of Urfa, close to the Syrian border. In Turkish, Göbekli Tepe means belly hill. It is an unremarkable name for a place that turned out to be extraordinary. American and Turkish researchers surveyed the hill in 1963. They noted some limestone fragments on the surface. They concluded it was probably a medieval cemetery. They moved on. That was not unusual. Archaeological surveys at the time covered enormous amounts of ground quickly. You could not dig everywhere. The hill was filed and forgotten. 31 years later, Klaus Schmidt was finishing work at a nearby Stone Age settlement. He decided, almost by chance, to take a second look at the old survey notes about Belly Hill. He drove out to see it. He recognized immediately that what the 1963 team had dismissed as medieval stonework was something far older. The shapes of the limestone fragments, the way they were arranged in the soil, the style of what little was visible above ground, it matched patterns he had seen at other Neolithic sites in the region. He began digging the following year. What he found under that hill is still being processed by the academic world, 30 years later. Let us start with the numbers, because the numbers are the first thing that breaks the standard story. Göbekli Tepe dates to approximately 9,600 BC. That is the mainstream scientific consensus backed by extensive radiocarbon dating. Some individual data points from wall plaster in certain sections have returned even older readings, but 9,600 BC is where the solid evidence sits. Think about what that means in comparison to things you already know. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 2,500 BC. Göbekli Tepe predates it by at least 7,000 years. Stonehenge in England dates to roughly 3,000 BC. Göbekli Tepe is more than twice as old. The earliest known cities in ancient Mesopotamia, the civilizations of Sumer that most history courses point to as the beginning of organized human society, date to around 4,500 to 5,000 BC. Göbekli Tepe predates the first Sumerian cities by over 5,000 years. And yet the people who built Göbekli Tepe had none of the things we associate with civilization. Early excavations found no evidence of permanent housing at the site at all. Researchers originally believed it was a ceremonial destination visited by nomadic groups who built the circles, used them, and then moved on. More recent digs have since found evidence of actual living structures at the site, complicating that picture further. We still do not know with certainty who lived there or whether anyone lived there year-round. What we do know is that the bones found in the fill layers come almost entirely from wild animals. Gazelle, wild boar, crane, fox. These were people living at the very dawn of farming. Mobile people. People who still moved with the seasons and the herds at a time when agriculture was just beginning to take hold in this part of the world. People who, by every model of human development written before this discovery, were supposed to be too busy surviving to build anything at all. And they built this. Here is what they actually built, because words like complex and structure do not really capture it. The site covers an area roughly 1,000 feet wide and 50 feet tall above the surrounding plain. Within that area, ground-penetrating radar has identified a significant number of additional large monumental structures still buried in the ground, well beyond those already under excavation. Each structure is formed by a ring of T-shaped limestone pillars connected by low stone walls. The pillars are massive. The largest ones stand 5.5 meters tall. That is about 18 feet. They weigh between 10 and 20 tons each. They were cut from the bedrock of the hill using only flint tools, shaped into deliberate T-forms, transported to their positions, and raised upright. The faces of the pillars are covered in carvings, not random scratches, detailed, controlled, intentional relief carvings of animals, foxes, wild boar, cranes, snakes, lions, scorpions, vultures, and in a handful of cases, something that appears to be a human arm carved along the side of the pillar, as if the stone itself is a body. Several enclosures have been substantially excavated, labeled A through to at least I by the excavation team. Enclosure D is the largest and best preserved. Its two central pillars stand over 5 meters tall and face each other at the center of the circle. And here is what needs to sit with you for a moment. After 30 years of excavation by a team of professional archaeologists using some of the best equipment available, only about 10% of the site has been uncovered. The vast majority of Göbekli Tepe is still in the ground. Much of the site remains unexcavated, and researchers have deliberately chosen to keep it that way for now. Now here is where the story gets even harder to explain away. The builders did not abandon Göbekli Tepe. They buried it, deliberately and methodically, over a very long period of time. The fill material that covered the structures is not random wind-blown sediment. It was packed carefully. The fill layers contained flint tools, animal bones, and stone fragments placed systematically around the pillars, as if the people doing it were following a specific procedure, not dumping. Packing. Each enclosure appears to have had its own life cycle. It was built, used for some period of time that could have spanned decades or centuries, and then deliberately sealed. Then a new enclosure was built nearby. The cycle repeated. Over approximately 1,400 years of continuous activity, the builders filled in their own work again and again. The irony noted by every archaeologist who has studied this is that the burial preserved the site perfectly. The enclosures exposed to the air have suffered damage from plowing and erosion over the millennia. The buried ones are intact. Whoever decided to seal them may have, in some functional sense, preserved them for the future. But why bury them at all? The leading theories among professional archaeologists involve ritual closure. Sacred spaces in many cultures across human history have gone through decommissioning rituals. When a space has served its purpose, or when beliefs shift, the space is ceremonially retired, buried, sealed. But that explanation requires that these hunter-gatherers had a shared belief system sophisticated enough to include structured ritual cycles across multiple generations, which itself rewrites what we thought we knew about pre-agricultural human society. Now, I want to tell you about one specific pillar, because this is the part of the story that opened up the deepest questions. It is called Pillar 43. It stands in enclosure D. Researchers sometimes call it the vulture stone. The entire front face is covered in a dense, carved scene. At the center is a vulture with wings spread, carrying a round disc. Below it is a headless human figure. Around them are a scorpion, a crane, a snake, and several other animals. At the top, repeated handbag-shaped symbols whose meaning is still debated. For decades, this carving was striking but uninterpretable. Then, in 2017, researchers from the University of Edinburgh published a paper in the journal Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry. They mapped the animals to astronomical constellations using software that reconstructs the ancient night sky. The vulture mapped to Sagittarius, the scorpion to Scorpius. When they positioned those constellations where the carving placed them, they arrived at a specific date, approximately 10,950 BC, plus or minus 250 years. That date corresponds closely to the onset of the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden severe cooling roughly 12,800 years ago that lasted about 1,000 years. Temperatures in some regions dropped by 10 degrees Celsius in just decades. Ecosystems collapsed, large animal species went extinct. Human populations were devastated. The Edinburgh researchers proposed that the carving may record a comet impact that triggered this cooling. The headless figure, mass death. The vulture with the disc, a fragment of comet or a changed sky. It is a striking theory. It is also disputed. The site archaeologists have pointed out that the same imagery is well explained by mortuary ritual. Modified human skulls have been found at the site. Sky burial, where the dead are exposed to birds, is documented across the ancient Near East. The vulture and the headless figure may simply belong to that tradition. Both readings may be partially true. What can be said is this. Some researchers argue the orientations of the structures and the positions of the central pillars reflect deliberate astronomical awareness. Whether that means star worship, calendar keeping, or something we have no name for, we do not yet know. So the story we were taught has a serious problem. The textbook sequence went like this. Farming leads to surplus. Surplus leads to settled communities. Settled communities lead to religion. Religion leads to monuments. Göbekli Tepe was built at the very beginning of farming in this region, if not before it. The domestication of wheat in this part of the world happened in roughly the same period Göbekli Tepe was already standing. Some researchers have flipped the sequence entirely. They propose that shared ritual came first, that coordinating hundreds of people to build and maintain these structures created the social and logistical pressure that drove agriculture forward. You need to feed a workforce. The agriculture may have followed the monument, not the other way around. This is not a fringe theory. Schmidt proposed it himself. It has been discussed in peer-reviewed journals and at mainstream archaeological conferences. If it is correct, then the entire story we tell about where we came from needs a serious look. And Göbekli Tepe is not the only place forcing this conversation. Consider Çatalhöyük in central Turkey, occupied from around 7400 BC to 6200 BC. At its peak, it housed between 5,000 and 8,000 people in a settlement with no streets at all. Residents walked across the rooftops and entered their homes through holes in the ceiling. They buried their dead directly under the floors where they slept. Some houses, when excavated, had up to 60 skeletons beneath the floors. The living slept above their ancestors every night. A settlement of 8,000 people operating at that level of social and ritual organization should not have existed in 7400 BC by any standard model we were given. Then, there is the Tower of Jericho, built around 8000 BC in what is now the West Bank. The tower stands 8.5 meters tall, that is 28 feet. It is made of undressed stone with an internal staircase of 22 steps. Researchers estimate it required 100 workers, more than 100 days to complete. It was built by people who had not yet invented pottery. UNESCO has recognized the site as a World Heritage location, and archaeologists describe the wall and tower as among the earliest evidence of monumental communal construction anywhere in the world. Nobody taught you about the Tower of Jericho in school. Almost nobody in America has heard of it. These are not isolated anomalies. Göbekli Tepe, Çatalhöyük, the Tower of Jericho. 3 sites, 3 different locations, all showing levels of organized human activity and architectural skill that predate everything we were told to expect. And every time the date moves, the textbooks quietly update the number without stepping back and asking what the pattern means. Everything I have told you so far is documented and in the academic record. You can look every single claim up. What comes next is me thinking out loud. Only about 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Much of the site remains sealed underground. And archaeologists have deliberately reburied sections of what they uncovered, following Schmidt's philosophy that future technology will allow more precise and careful excavation than current methods permit. The most important archaeological site of the past century, a site that has already forced a rewrite of the standard origin story of human civilization, is still mostly sealed underground. And the people running it are intentionally going slow. They are right to do so. Rushing an excavation this significant could destroy context that future scientists will need. The decision to preserve it carefully is the correct call, but here is the question that remains. What else is down there? We know the excavated enclosures span approximately 1,400 years of construction and use. That is roughly 56 generations of people maintaining and building at this site. Over that time, the craftsmanship does something unexpected. The earlier layers show the most refined work. The later ones are simpler, as if something was being passed down imperfectly, as if part of what they knew was already being lost. What was the very first thing built here? What tradition were the builders drawing on when they cut that first pillar? We cannot answer that yet. The hill is still out there in southern Turkey. 50 feet of layered human history sitting on a dry plain under a sky that has not changed much since the last ice age ended. The pillars are down there in the dark right now, sealed for 12,000 years, carrying their carvings and their alignments and their unanswered questions, patient in a way that nothing built since can match. Whatever is down there has been waiting longer than Egypt has existed. It will still be waiting when the next team arrives with better tools. And the story of who we are and when we began and what we were capable of before anyone wrote a single word down is nowhere near finished. If this made you think differently about what you know about human history, please subscribe to this channel right now. We cover exactly this, the places, the discoveries, and the patterns that the textbooks have not caught up to yet. Hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. Your subscription is what keeps this